If you're lucky enough to make your home in Trumbull, Connecticut, you're probably familiar with names like Daniels Farm Road, Middlebrook School, Beach Park, Nichols Improvement Association. Today, these names describe roadways, schools, parks, and neighborhoods. But originally, these names belong to a fascinating cast of farmers, heroes, settlers, and soldiers who share an important bond with the people who recognize those names today. We all call Trumbull home. I'm Debbie Silber with the Trumbull Historical Society, and I'd like to invite you to discover or rediscover the town that you thought you knew. If you really want to understand where the Trumbull of today came from, there's no better place to start than the Trumbull Historical Society. Organized in 1964, the Society focuses on historic preservation, education, and community involvement.
Goodies in the back. I thought I'd give you a brief history about afternoon tea, which is of course the meal you're about to enjoy. But afternoon tea actually has a very interesting social history, particularly for women. And it began in the 19th century when Anna, the Duchess of Bedford, realized that she was hungry midday. This has happened to me many times. In Anna's time, in the early 19th century.
Yeah.
Plenty of paint. That's funny. Plenty of paper towels.
And keep in mind, the shells are going to be either face up or face down, so you don't really need to paint both sides.
That's right.
You won't see one side.
I think your little egg is upside down.
Right.
Yeah, we have a
Maybe just do one more, and I think we're great. And if anyone
For farm families, fabric was free if you didn't mind using the cloth sacks that had held flour and animal feed. So that's actually kind of pretty, right?
Yeah.
It wouldn't make a bad dress, would it? And I think this dress that she's wearing is supposed to be from a feed sack, that pattern, that green dress.
In the late 1970s, the Society found a home here at 1856 Huntington Turnpike in Trumbull's Nichols section. The house, built around 1820, was constructed on land settled in the late 1600s by Abraham Nichols. Nichols was among the first to venture north from the town of Stratford to settle in what would later become Trumbull. By the 1900s, the farm had passed to Florence Nichols, whose husband, George Woods, developed the house and grounds into a stunning estate that included an orchard, gardens, and a greenhouse. Upon Florence's death, the house and the grounds were left to Nichols United Methodist Church, which sold the land to the town for use as an open space park. The house was in disrepair and marked for demolition, but members of the fledgling Historical Society launched a last-minute effort to save the Nichols homestead as a town museum. In 1978, a lease was signed with the town, allowing the Society to rent the house. After more than $70,000 in repairs and renovation, the house opened in 1980 as the Trumbull Historical Society Museum.
I think if we go back to 2002 when we put in the statue in front of the town hall, a lot more interest came to the town of who really is Jonathan Trumbull. We'd probably need to look back to 1797 to see what the town's founders thought when they chose the name Trumbull. At that time, the name Trumbull was probably the most honorable name in Connecticut history. Because Jonathan Trumbull was elected by the people of Connecticut and not appointed by a king, when the Revolutionary War broke out, we were on a good footing here in Connecticut to provide provisions to our troops. And Jonathan Trumbull took on a new role. He became a master of logistics for the cause of the Revolutionary War. Washington referred to Jonathan Trumbull as Brother Jonathan because of the provisions that he was able to provide. In fact, Jonathan Trumbull had a war office that he had in Lebanon, and statesmen like Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Lafayette, all came and visited him, and they discussed tactics of the war itself in his office there in Lebanon.
Jonathan Trumbull never set foot in the town that bears his name. Still, early Trumbull had no shortage of notable residents. Among them, a slave named Nero Hawley, a Revolutionary soldier who served at Valley Forge, and Elijah Middlebrook, a local doctor whose almanac offers us an intriguing glimpse into 19th century life.
Elijah Middlebrook learned to practice medicine from his father, Stephen Middlebrook, who was Trumbull's first town doctor. He went to study at the College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York City and became a licensed practitioner in 1811. And when he was just 26 years old, he took a course in astronomy and decided to publish Middlebrook's Almanac. The almanac had advice for farmers on when to plant things, what the weather was going to be like that year. He offered medical advice and health tips. It included recipes, anecdotes, advertisements for local businesses, and also jokes. And I have a joke here. Two friends met the other day in the street. "What a shocking bad hat you wear," exclaimed one of them. "My dear friend, I wear it only because I love my liberty." "But what on earth has your liberty got to do with your hat?" "Oh, a great deal. My wife has sworn she would never walk out with me as long as I should wear such a hat." There's a Trumbull legend that one year when Middlebrook was trying to predict the weather for the 4th of July, he asked his son for a suggestion. His son told him to predict snow, and he did so. And that summer, on the 4th of July, it's rumored that there was a huge hailstorm, and the town was very impressed with his abilities to predict such weather. The almanac was widely popular, and it must have been because Middlebrook published it for 54 years. The Historical Society is very lucky to have a collection of 65 issues donated to us by Cornelius Middlebrook of Wilton, Connecticut. The Middlebrooks were famous for throwing grand parties in their home called Stepping Stones on Main Street in Trumbull. One of the upstairs bedrooms had a removable wall so that it could open up into a grand ballroom. There is a rumor that if any of the guests got too boisterous, Mrs. Middlebrook would throw them down the stairs and out the house. So they might have been very rowdy parties.
Items in the Historical Society's collection were donated to the museum by Trumbull residents. Although some items in the collection are of general historical interest, the museum is particularly interested in items directly related to Trumbull history.
In the storage room, we do have some pieces of furniture. Most of our large pieces are down on display in the museum on the first floor, but we do have a tremendous amount of textiles. We have a very extensive quilt collection, which has been completely documented by the Connecticut Quilt Search. We also have quite a few items of clothing. I think our earliest dress would be, I want to say probably the 1860s, but we do have quite a few from the late 1800s, early 1900s, which are in quite good condition. As we keep moving our exhibits around, changing them, it gives us a chance to bring things out of the acquisitions room, the storage room, and put them on display with a description of the item. In other words, it's constantly being refreshed, the exhibits. The clock behind us is one of my favorite pieces that we acquired about 2 or 3 years ago. It was donated by a Trumbull resident, Gilbert Stanley. It had been in his family for a number of years. It's about 1860. The piece is made in Connecticut, up in Bristol, and it's in excellent condition. We have another piece in the Sealy room, which I have a little story that goes along with it. We were putting up our first Victorian Christmas exhibit, and I needed another table. And so I was hunting around up there, and there was a table. It appeared to be a table covered over, had it brought downstairs, and the top lifted up, and it was not a table. It was a melodeon, which had been, again, this was about an 1860s piece that had been in the Trinity Episcopal Church. How it got to the Society via the Fairchild Library, I'm not quite sure. But it's a small piece. It was used by them. Again, it was made in Bristol, Connecticut. If anyone has any items they'd like to donate, we like them at their convenience to give us a call and let us know that they might be coming over, and we can view it. And then we'll decide if it's something that we can put into our permanent collection. If it's a large item, if they call, then we can set up a time to view it.
Among the most fascinating resources of the Society is its collection of photographs that capture Trumbull life from the middle of the 19th century.
We've got pictures of all of Trumbull, not so much Tashua because that was mostly farmland, lots of Long Hill, and of course Nichols. And anytime anybody wants to, possibly purchase one, frame and put on a wall or something, and a lot of people do realize in town that we are a source. We also printed a book, our Arcadia book, which is our most popular seller, and has wonderful old pictures, and it was great fun putting together. A local bank did a beautiful blow-up of the Grasshopper, which was a trolley that ran through town along Main Street, and it was green in color. Hence it was called the Grasshopper, because it would hippity-hop along and many times jump the track, and everybody would have to get off it. And then the men that were on it would lift it up so it couldn't have been terribly heavy and put it back on the track, and then everybody would pile back on again. And people rode it to school in Bridgeport and to work in Bridgeport. And when the bank blew up the picture, I guess they didn't know the story that went along with it. And when one of our members went into the bank, they saw that they had made it red. And it was lovely, it looked great, but it did not look like the green grasshopper. So they took it down at their expense and had it redone, and it is now green. If anybody has any pictures that they would like, and if they don't want to give them up, if they will lend them to us and we'll make copies and return them, we'd be most appreciative.
An important way that the Society serves the public is by providing genealogical information to those with family ties to Trumbull.
We have this wonderful card file that was a gift from Betty Harding. She was a woman in town who spent her life researching all the history. Most of the card information came from either the town hall after many hours and hours, or the old records from Trumbull Congregational Church, the first church established in Trumbull, so many of the records came from there. In this card catalog, there must be thousands of cards. What's so interesting, too, is because it can be used for cross-reference. Many times it's hard to find maybe a maiden name or the wife's name or the family, and if you know who she married, many of our cards might say she was the daughter of. Also, it also usually can tell you the date of birth, the date of death, and many times where they're buried here in Trumbull. We will get an inquiry as to, do you happen to know if my relative is buried and what cemetery they are in? We have a book that was compiled by the WPA back in 1934-35 when Franklin Delano Roosevelt hired men to put them to work. And there was a group of men who came in and went through each cemetery and each headstone and compiled this book by cemeteries and also alphabetically. So it helps us to quickly give someone an answer and what cemetery the relative is buried in. The Trumbull Historical Society also has a very interesting book. It's the 1860 census. This way we can go to a particular street, the address, and find out what family was living in that home at the time, right down to the servants, and even sometimes what country the servant came from.
Our Trumbull students are full of questions. They're very interested in things when they come, and very well behaved. It's really a pleasure to teach them. All of our Trumbull third graders come every spring to visit the Historical Society, even private schools, and it's kind of a highlight of our year, really. We have dedicated docents that volunteer their time, and we just want to bring history to life and teach children to respect our past, which is a very important lesson to learn, I think.
To pick it up, pass it along to your friend. Can you imagine Mom having to iron that? Very gently. Thank you. So now you can see why when they said Tuesday was ironing day, because it took all day practically. And girls, you probably would have had maybe 2, maybe 3 if you were very fortunate, dresses. So you can't keep changing them every day, so you want to keep them clean. So you would have had a pinafore, what they called a pinafore, or a big long apron.
Some of the third graders do not know what to expect, and they just come in with an open mind, really. And by the time they leave, they are excited, and so many of them say that this was the best class trip they've ever had. And that says it all.
American groups that were living here in Trumbull. This that you see in this tool here, this is called a hetchel. What you're seeing here is a plant called flax, and it's like a tall grass. It's very, very thin stems, and inside of each long stem are these beautiful fibers. You pull it through the hetchel and get it all cleaned out and straight and lovely. It turns out looking like beautiful.
Frequently after the third graders leave us, they go back to their classes and write wonderful thank you notes to us, which are great fun to read. Some of them are funny, interesting, and we definitely get very positive feedback from them and actually from their teachers too. And I would love to read one to you. It was so nice of you to take the time to teach our class about the history of Trumbull. What interested me was when we went upstairs and saw the very, very old stuff they used in the olden days. Now, just a little aside coming from me, keep in mind that many of these old things were used by our docents in the olden days, and that would include me.
Visitors need no guide to appreciate the lovely landscape that surrounds the museum in Abraham Nichols Park. But it's even more fascinating to know something of the history of the site, which reflects not only the history of our town, but of our country.
Rochambeau is a general who was sent from France to the colonies to work with George Washington. He was in charge of 3,000 troops from England and France and Germany, and they arrived in Rhode Island and marched across Rhode Island, crossing the Naugatuck River and the Housatonic River and through Connecticut to join Washington at Yorktown. And in their march, they came upon Monroe, which was not Monroe yet, but was New Stratford, and North Stratford, which was Trumbull. And in Trumbull, 12 to 15 of them stayed right back here behind the Historical Society on what was called Mountain Hill. And from there they had an unencumbered view of Long Island Sound, and they could see all the way to New York and almost all the way out to New London. And they could keep track of any British movement on the Sound. The next day, they then got up and joined Rochambeau as he marched on to Yorktown to battle the British, along with Washington, and that turned out to be the end of the Revolutionary War.
Just a short walk away from that revolutionary site is a reminder of another revolution, an industrial one.
Well, if you visit the Historical Society, you'll find a little nature trail right behind our building, and you're welcome to walk it any time. And if you walk up that path, you'll find the remains of where a tannery once stood. And although the building's foundations are no longer there, this tannery represents a lot of industry and progress that we had in Trumbull during the 1800s. And current residents may not associate industry and progress with our little town, but we had many businesses and many factories that made up Trumbull's own industrial revolution. The Industrial Revolution began in Europe and England in the 1700s, and it took a little while to reach Trumbull. But by the 1800s it had, and it brought its factories, its innovation, and its progress to our little town. And we had many, many factories and businesses here. We had mills, we had grist mills, saw mills, fulling mills. We had a carriage factory. We had a witch hazel factory. We made boots, shoes, combs. We even had several cigar factories. And we actually had 2 paper factories, Fairchild and Tate's. Those are 2 names that you probably recognize if you grew up and live in the area. If we had all this industry in these factories in the 1800s, what happened? What happened to our industrial revolution in Trumbull?
Many of Trumbull's businesses burned down in fires like the witch hazel factory, and in the 1800s there were no organized fire departments in Trumbull. The earliest was in 1916 in Nichols. Before that, if there was a fire, someone in the town would shoot off a shotgun and it would let people know to come running with buckets of water. It's not very effective.
Many families and businesses moved west after the Civil War, so that was a contributing factor. Also, the automobile took many families away, and they could now commute a little farther than they could by a horse and carriage or by a horse or even a train. Also, our proximity to Bridgeport was detrimental to a lot of local businesses. Shipping was cheaper in Bridgeport, labor was cheaper, so many businesses just decided to move there and set up their establishments in Bridgeport.
We know from these sites that Trumbull is continually changing. Perhaps the most important role of the Historical Society is to protect and preserve what our forebears have left behind for us. To that purpose, the Society has completed a register of historic structures in the town and assisted in a state effort to document its remaining barns. These and other structures are an important reminder of our enduring pride in our past. Come join us at the Trumbull Historical Society.
While we change, it's important to hold on to our history, and as long as we have a historical society, we'll do just that.